The Underwater Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I experienced Dogman during one period of my life, although it was on a few occasions during that time period. We lived for one summer at a tiny lake in Wisconsin when I was a teenager. In fact, that lake was why I was curious to check out the family vacation that year. I was old enough that it was optional for me, but the idea of a lake was interesting. Also, my girlfriend had recently dumped me for my best friend, so I had very little going on for either a love life or any buddies to help me get over my loss. When I found out there were several girls around my age living in the other homes on the lake, I was fully on board with the new summer home that my dorky dad had picked out. I didn't know at first that this would lead to a terrifying and painful personal encounter with the Dogman, or that my friends and I would get silenced by these strange men who claimed to be working for the government. The girl who liked me best over there we'll call Bambi, as she had giant brown eyes. Her boyfriend had moved away, and she was ripe for the newbie, who was me in this case. Her other friends were pretty much already paired off, so I was welcomed really fast into that little clique of 6 that sometimes expanded to a dozen or more when someone's parents would go away for a day or two. Because Bambi seemed to have some status locally, I wasn't messed with too much by the other guys. The girls were pleasant to me as well, glad that I was keeping Bambi too busy for their boyfriends to get too close to. I sensed that some of the guys would have seen my girl as an upgrade over theirs, but nobody was ready to make any big moves that summer. I think we were mostly happy with what and who we had in that moment, and glad to have that lake to swim in and so forth. I don't know the exact size or depth of this lake, but it was tiny in the grand scheme of things. I think we had 9 or 10 houses with backyards on the edges of it. Some areas were sandy and beach-like, while in other spots vegetation and trees grew right up to the very edge of the water. Bambi's parents had some overgrown land that was underdeveloped and unused, so we young ones would often climb in there and be in our own little world. We were surrounded with tree branches and bushes on all sides except one, but we had our meeting spot in the center where we could party. In one direction there was a view through the vegetation of the lake, and in another direction I could see the lights of Bambi's house. Other than that, there was only the illumination of the flashlight that we would bring with us. Those were the days before cell phones, so I'm talking about an old school, big, long, heavy flashlight with about 18 batteries inside that thing. Maybe it was 48. I just remember opening it up once and it was like a clown car for batteries inside there. Obviously, we never lit a fire in our secret spot because we'd probably have burned down Bambi's parents' property, but we referred to those meetings as our campfires, or sometimes the flashlight itself got called the campfire. We'd sit around this patch of dirt in there on rocks and fallen logs and tell each other stories. Personal stories, urban legends, funny stories, secret stories. They weren't all scary, but they did usually get scarier as the night wore on. One night a couple of the guys started telling me that the lake we lived around had a monster in it. Then they teased Bambi that she was going to leave me for the lake monster. I was surprised to see that Bambi was getting really upset at their joking around, because she usually had a sense of humor about anything. I asked the guys to quit it, and then asked Bambi to explain what they were talking about. She told me that once, 3 summers earlier, she had been grabbed by the lake monster, and that she had to have surgery to fix the scars or something like that. She pointed out parts of her legs that I guess to her looked different than before, but she didn't look scarred to me. I couldn't tell if she was pulling my leg, please forgive the pun, but here is what she told me happened to her when she was 3 years younger. Bambi had been out swimming with a boyfriend who had moved to the West Coast since then. He was the only other witness to this experience. Bambi said that she and the boyfriend were floating in the center of the lake, trying to have an argument with each other that their families would not be able to hear. So they were not having fun at the time, whispering angrily to each other, and it was a tense situation to start with. Bambi said she suddenly started feeling something tickling her legs, and she kept kicking it away. The boyfriend wasn't feeling anything like that, so he told her it was probably plant life or small fish. When she kept complaining about the tickling, the boyfriend eventually held his nose and dived under the water to have a look around. When he broke the surface again, he was choking from having inhaled water on the way back up. Somehow he coughed out to her that there was a monster in the water, and then Bambi got grabbed and pulled under the surface of the lake. While under there, she said she turned to see what had grabbed each of her ankles and was dragging her downward. It was not the creature from the Black Lagoon. It wasn't even any sort of fish or reptile life at all. In fact, it was quite hairy, and with the exception of the human-like hands, it looked more like a big dog swimming under the surface than anything else. The hands had sharp claws, which tore at the girl's skin. Within seconds, the boyfriend arrived on the scene under the water, and the big dog swam off in a huge cloud of air bubbles. When Bambi and her guy hit the surface, they looked all around, but they did not see that Dogman emerge anywhere. Getting out of the water fast, they went home, only to have the doorbell ring, and for them to receive an unwelcome visit from two men claiming to be government officials. Since no adults were home at the time, the two teens were quite intimidated. Basically, two adult males with very pale skin wearing dark business suits that seemed a decade out of date. I'm unclear if any ID was provided by the uninvited guests, but they seemed to know all about the incident that the boy and girl had just gotten home from. In fact, Bambi was still treating her wounds as the couple of strange men arrived. They told the kids that they'd better not repeat the details of that story to anyone, and they kept referring to the monster in the lake as the Dogman. The kids also used that term when I knew them a few years later, but they claimed it originated with the government men in the dark suits. I really thought everyone was joking, hazing the new guy. I told them that I believed them, but I really didn't. Still, they would sometimes tease Bambi about being the bride of the Dogman. I wondered why they would do that, and why it would upset her if there were no truth to the story. Gradually, I got to hear more and more people's accounts of the Dogman in the lake. None of the stories involved the creature coming up for air. He was seen under the water, or felt under the water. I saw some scars that were alleged to have been created by that lake Dogman, but they might also have been made by an ordinary dog or a rose bush for all I know. It's not like I did a DNA test on their scratches and scars. So, I forget exactly the order of some of this, but several people told me how they encountered this underwater Dogman. Like I mentioned, nobody ever talked about seeing him go into or come out of the water. But if he was a canine, then he had to have been able to retreat to somewhere that had air and oxygen. Otherwise he would have drowned, right? So if he wasn't coming up for air, where was he going? A cave? An underwater tunnel with air pockets? Did he know some underwater exit to the surface that was out of our sight? Well, clearly he did. Either that was the solution, or else these stories were just made up to scare the new guy. So I got to hear a new Dogman account minutes after it happened, when this blonde kid got all bruised while out alone for a morning swim. He claimed he was attacked from below, but not by the Dogman's famous claws. This attack involved some sort of bludgeoning, perhaps punching, up from below in the water. The guy said the air was knocked out of him, and then the beast came up just below the surface and continued to behave in a violent manner toward him. Hearing him screaming for help, the guy's girlfriend arrived and the beast dropped down into the water and was soon gone. She never actually saw the creature, but she saw the state her boyfriend was in and got him to the shore, where they then took a trip to the emergency room. This guy gave a somewhat detailed description of a big, smelly, wet dog with a long snout, full of sharp teeth and fists bigger than his head. I asked him a couple of times if he really meant fists, and he got sore at me for asking the same question over and over. Yes, he meant fists, and yes, he meant dog. I wondered if he got belted in his noggin a few times, and I sort of left it at that. But still, someone or something had done that to this guy. So if the swimming dogman was supposed to be a joke, it was not a very funny one. We all retreated to our sort of hideout behind Bambi's house. Unbelievably, while we were in there, these two guys wearing dark business suits came right up to us, like they knew we were going to be in there, and they started asking to talk to the kid who had been attacked earlier by that underwater dogman. He was scared of those men, at least as scared as he was of the beast, and he didn't want to go out of that natural enclosure of trees. Something about finally understanding that this story about the monster and the men in black was all true after all kind of made me feel very angry. Who did these guys think they were to be coming to a private lake and telling people what they were allowed to talk about? And if they knew what the dogman thing was, didn't these strange men have a duty to warn the public about it? I mean, instead of threatening the public about it? So I stood up and I lost my temper. And my new friends? Well, actually, they all agreed with me. Things started to become hostile for the self-proclaimed government men, and I was quite surprised to see them retreat. I was a little embarrassed that I had lost my temper that way in front of the others, but I was relieved that it seemed to have worked. I don't know if these were actual traditional MIB men in black like in the UFO literature, because these two got scared of me, and I was just a teenager. I can't recall any story where the MIB were scared of people, only stories of people getting scared of them. So on my last day at the lake, this was my final experience concerning the underwater dogman, or any other kind of dogman for that matter. My girlfriend for those few months had already left for her family's winter home, and we were getting ready to go ourselves. I decided to go for one last swim in the lake by myself, since I knew I was going to miss it. Like, how dumb was that of me? If I were watching a horror movie and someone did that, I would yell at the screen that the monster is going to be in the lake. I mean, of course it was. I don't think that I'd really truly accepted that the dogman was real, even after seeing the clear evidence that I'd already seen. I mean, I knew the men in dark business suits part was real, so logically that must have meant that the dogman part was real as well. But it did not happen to me personally, so I guess it was still sort of hypothetical to me. Like, I had heard that some scientist somewhere had figured out how to project voices directly into your head using microwaves, but I thought that was just a conspiracy theory. Then one day, I passed a bus stop, and these freaking ghost voices started talking in my head. I almost had an attack right there, but it was telling me about a TV show, and after a while, I figured out that this was some kind of electronic ad that played sound in your actual mind somehow. So even though I'd been told this existed 5 or 6 times by other people, I never really accepted it as real until I experienced it myself. In that same way, the underwater dogman was just so far out there as a concept that even though I knew it had to be a real thing, I also just did not believe that it was a real thing. And so, when I got to the center of the lake, and something that felt like a hand grabbed my leg just above the ankle, I screamed, like a stuck pig. I kicked something hairy with my other foot, which caused it to release my other leg. I tried to swim back to shore, but found my right leg once again being grabbed, which caused my face and head to go splashing underwater. I could sort of see the dark creature, and I kicked at it, scoring one hit at the end of its long snout. This was a canine after all. It reminded me, in that panicked moment, of one of the banana splits. I mean, it had this big giant dog head, like a wolf from 1,000,000 years ago. And then, this almost humanoid furry body underneath that dinosaur dog head. I mean, the body wasn't entirely human. It was a mix of canine and human. There was nothing fish-like about it at all, though. Nothing apparently aquatic. Yes, the eyes glowing underwater was weird. It was disorienting. It felt like I was trapped in a scene in a movie. But honestly, it felt more like horror than science fiction. I didn't feel like I was battling a cryptid. I felt like I was battling something more like a demon. The experience was far more like H.P. Lovecraft than it was like Jeff Meldrum. I witnessed water bubbles coming from its nose and mouth and rising to the surface. That means it breathed air, same as a normal canine, and that meant it had to eventually get more air into its lungs. The beast's chest was so broad that I have to say, it might have had space to hold air for a month in there. Certainly he'd be able to hold his breath far longer than I could. So I kept kicking wildly at him until I could break free and get my head above the water to breathe again. I heard my father blowing his air horn, which means he must have heard my screaming. But I was paranoid about that Dogman, which I could no longer see moving around under the surface of the water. Diving again and again, I could no longer catch sight of the creature anywhere under there. I found myself continuing to dive, even after my father caught up to me in his rowboat. I desperately wanted to understand where the Dogman could have gone to in order to escape that fast. I'm assuming it was my father's air horn that scared him off, but I could see no obvious tunnels or caves or oxygen tanks for that matter. I don't really have the vaguest idea where the creature went, but you can understand why I might have wanted to find out. My father started getting worried about me, and when he finally convinced me to row back with him, he asked me not to mention anything about this to the others. When I said that it was important that they all be told the truth about the Dogman, Dad interrupted me. Then he told me that if I blabbed about the Dogman to my mother, or anyone else in the family, he would tell them that when I saw the monster, I screamed like a little girl. So we had ourselves a deal. Once we finished packing and drove on out of there, I noticed 2 men in dark business suits standing alongside the road, trying to wave us down. When my father didn't notice them and kept on driving, I stuck out my tongue, and I gave them the finger. And as immature a reaction as that was, I'd like to think I would give them the same reaction today. I did not and do not care for those characters, whoever they might have actually been. I didn't need them to tell me to keep quiet about this weirdness. I had my dad threatening to reveal how high-pitched my fear scream was, and that held me in place. So many years have passed, and memories are all I have left. I have never kept in touch with Bambi or any of the other kids who live there, and it's weird that I can't even remember the name of the lake, other than that it was in Wisconsin. It's almost like someone, or something, is trying to get me to forget all about the underwater Dogman. CS keeps us going like a boss, 'cause the Rolling Stone can't gather no moss. She's financed so many shows, hours and hours. Sometimes we think she got the magic, powers. If you want to know a person that's a full-on yes, you should try to meet our EPCS. I would like to continue thanking our executive producer CS, who once again magically sent us a big donation at the exact time we suddenly had an unexpected expense that we needed to cover. She clearly must be spying on us Bigfoots over here. This last time it was really almost spooky how her timing worked out, and both Henry and I think of her as some kind of a magical human person. We can't thank her enough, but we will keep trying anyhow. Thank you, CS. And speaking of Henry, he's got some info about our secret perks and clubs and so forth and whatnot. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.